Well, hello, folks. Welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host, and today I've got an exciting conversation to bring you with Ayize Jama-Everett. I'd like to tell you about him a little bit, then a documentary he's shooting, and then we'll get to housekeeping and then get started. So Ayize Jama-Everett holds 3 master's degrees, one in divinity, one in psychology, and one in fine arts and writing. He blends these degrees in all of his work, often identifying as a guerrilla theologian, a community-based therapist, and an Afrofuturist in the same breath. He's taught at Star King School for the Ministry, California College of the Arts, the University of California, Riverside, Western Colorado College, and several private high schools for 20 years. His expertise includes working with adolescents, the history of substance use in the United States, the history of sacred plant medicines in the Maghreb, the religious roots of political violence from Ireland to the Middle East, educational arts, pedagogy, and Afrofuturism. He's published 4 novels, the Liminal series, and 2 graphic novels. I think he's got more than that, actually. I think I ordered more. So he's got a lot of books, and I've enjoyed them immensely. He does bridge together all of these dynamics really well, and I can safely say that I'm quite fond of Ayize. Check him out at atableofourown.org. And I want to just say a couple things they feature on this website. First of all, the documentary is a 3-day filmed conference to document where participants have been. The goal is to create a documentary about gathering of Black luminaries that do work in the psychedelic space, joined by 35 key members from all around the country in a safe place. And the documentary gives participants the chance to share their strengths, experiences, hopes, and challenges within the psychedelic space. The goal, of course, being to highlight those doing great work and to expand the reach of these important ways of healing to more Black people. Also wishing to destigmatize these substances so they're no longer seen as white people stuff, and more as the natural balms and salves to Black people's psyches that we've been using for millennia. Amen to that. And he talks about this really interesting idea, which I've running with in all kinds of ways, about how whiteness and really how dominant power cultural dynamics are colonized approaches that disconnect us from our capacities to be connected, and it others us. It was a really exciting conversation. Ayize, thanks a lot, man, for this time. I look forward to more. Okay, so also you need to check out the website for The Sacred Speaks at thesacredspeaks.com. You can look at younghouston.org. It's an organization, the Young Center down here in Houston, I'm very much involved with and like to point you in their direction. Check out that website. The music is brought to you by Modern Nations. Hang around to the end of the episode. You'll hear the whole theme song, Clouds, a selection by Modern Nations, and you can reach them at modernnationsmusic.com. And also, The Sacred Speaks is brought to you by the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences. Check us out at thecenterforhas.com. It's a boutique integrative wellness center that my wife and I created many moons ago, and we continue to grow and expand. So for now, let's leave it there, and I bring you the conversation between Ayize and me. Thanks for being here, and we'll leave it there. New love unfolds, controls your dreams. Ayize, man, you and I have kind of been circling each other, and I'm really honored and excited about this conversation. I've been eager to talk to you. The subject matter is going to range, and I just, given the couple conversations that we've had, I just am eager to get to know you in this way, and certainly for other folks to get connected with what you're up to. It's good work.
Yeah. Yeah, you've been one of those voices that I'm like, oh no, I want to hear him more of
Yeah.
late,
Oh, sweetheart. Thank you.
especially with everything going on. So I'm like,
Amen.
I was looking forward to this.
Let's
Yeah.
get into it, man. So, I certainly think your documentary is something we need to circle into. It covers a lot of what you're bringing into the world, but also plants and, as you said, land.
Yeah.
This list of things: land, plants, religion, religious protection, turning 50, life changes, and
Yeah.
community. And I just know so much of that. When I read that list that you were providing, I was like, oh, this is going to be so good because I know how deeply invested you are in all these ideas. And I ordered all your books, and I have
Oh,
not read them all, but I plan on it because I think you have such a the written word for you is such a device for depth, communicating depth and in beautiful ways. So where does it begin? I mean, do you want to start with religion, or what feels potent for you?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with religion, we can start with the documentary. For me, they're all the same.
Yeah.
I don't really come from traditions that separate your religion from what keeps you alive.
Okay,
Like
well said, man.
if I'm living, it's because of God. If
Hmm.
I'm eating, it's because of God. If I'm happy, it's because of God. If I'm sad, it's because of God.
Hmm.
So God is that which is numinous and expressive and external and internal and all that is articulate and inarticulate.
Mm.
You know, um, and I think for me, I move forward in grace, hopefully, and in ever in awe of the fact that I get to breathe another breath. Like I
Mm.
don't take any of this shit for granted. I've lost, like all of us, I've lost people who I in my mind, have gone too young. Um, Even if they were, 80, so um I don't take my life for granted. And having worked not every, but having worked a lot of shitty jobs, the fact that like my job by and large now um, consists of helping people and creating beautiful things that help people, I see that as nothing more than a gift from the divine. Like I
Mm.
do not take that for granted for like any second of any day. Um, I think the documentary is was very much a proof of faith for me, because I am not trained as a documentary filmmaker. I am like that is like a very small part of my like educational background. Like I left TV and film production to go into religious studies. So like that's not what I was trained into, but when I got that call, that was a divine call that I needed to make a documentary about Black people and psychedelics.
Hmm.
And the evidence of that is every time I was like, okay, I don't have the money for this, boom, there's some money would come up, right? Or like, I don't know where I'm going to do this, boom, a place would show up. Or
Wow.
like, these people are going to come, boom. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like at a certain point, you just kind of have to surrender to it and just be like, and this is what it's going to be. So we're finally at the point now where we're actually streaming online. If you go to the website at tableofourown.org, people can just rent the film.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic. Good to know.
So it's been like a year and a half of touring it since Psychedelic Science,
Hmm.
got to again, and even though those viewings felt like divine inspiration, right? Because we showed in London, we showed in Oxford, we showed in Atlanta, we showed in LA, we showed in Boston, we showed in Portland, and every showing, it was like it felt a little bit like church. The
Mm.
Q&A after
Hmm.
was people who were looking for community, looking to find each other, either finding each other in that crowd. In Oakland, it was a crowd. Like we should have just declared church right there. Should have passed around the collection plate. But everywhere we went, it was like if it wasn't on the screen, right? If people were like, "Oh, okay, I finally see myself being recognized here," then it was in the audience.
Mm.
That feeling of divine connection. So for me, yeah, spirit is just it's ever present, and it's just on us to acknowledge that.
Okay, so good. That's a perfect setup here because to get a flavor of who you are, just a peek right there. And then let's go back in time and give a little context, who you are, how you got here, because you've laid that out about this documentary. And I recommend anybody who's curious, watch that documentary. I love that it's streaming now because I got a sneak peek and man, that's good stuff. You brought it big. So yeah, give us context, who you are.
Who am I? I don't know. I was born and raised in Harlem, New York. Born to revolutionaries that were separated. My father is Dr. Matulu Shakur, who died last year. He's one of the people that brought acupuncture to the South Bronx and Harlem to
Mm.
community acupuncture, especially a 5-point ear technique that helped people deal with heroin addiction. My mom worked at Harlem Hospital, one of the first people to be trained in ambulatory detox. One of the first people trained in New York in rape crisis counseling. And home was a lot, and it was an intense set. And I left home very, very young. New York in the 80s was crazy. It was,
Yeah.
crack, AIDS, um, you know, police violence, right? Like all of it was just up and alive and just like out there, and um best thing for me to do was to get out of the city. Um, I don't know if the best thing for me was to go to boarding school in New Hampshire, but that's what I did. Um, and for 2.5 years, I damn near lost my mind in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. But fortunately, I mean, I'm not trying to be a dick. It was called they're the White Mountains of New Hampshire. That's the name of it. Look at it.
It's,
Um,
it's a dual name though. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I can't make this up, right? Um, but yeah, and then they had an abroad program, and I went to France, and
Mm.
in France I met all these Algerians and Moroccans, and got to go to Morocco for the first time, and understood what hospitality was in a way that I hadn't understood it before.
Mm. Mm.
The joy of being able to provide for others. I learned that in Morocco. Um, but yeah, um, you know, grandmother was also a big influence on me. She passed about 6 or 7 years ago, after battling Alzheimer's for a while, but she was my first minister. She was the first one who she was the first one who laid it out for me. She was like, "Yeah, you can have a preacher. It's important to listen to the preacher, but there's nothing between you and God." She's like, "You just have to acknowledge God. There's no you don't have to talk to anybody else. You can talk directly to God." She asked me one time, she was like, "Do you think people that can't read will get to heaven?" And I said, "Well, why wouldn't they?" She's like, "Okay, so you can read the Bible, you can read the Quran, you can read the Torah, you can read those books, and they have good things in them, but don't think that that's the way to heaven."
Mm. Wisdom.
She's like, do good work. And she would always
Mm.
ask me when she called the house. She's from North Carolina, very dignified, Southern Baptist woman of God. So when she'd call him, she'd be like, "Grandson," she's like, "Did you do good today? Were you good to your mother today? Did you try and help someone today?"
Mm.
Then God is, and I would remember that always, like, did you do good today? Did you try and, help? So to my mom, my parents, my grandma, like just being of service to community has just been part of who I've been my entire life. Started working in community mental health when I came out to California. Um, ran drug and alcohol treatment program for teenagers, opened 2 group homes, worked in foster care,
Mm.
worked in juvie, did all that. Um, and just so we're clear, I had no BA. I got kicked out of undergrad. I had no BA. I was doing all of this work. I was supervising people with, MSWs and, MFTs, and I'm 22, 23, 24, like just not in the right spot to be doing all that stuff. Should have been somebody older and wiser, but
Mm.
budgets being what they were, they got the cheapest person they could find to do the hardest job imaginable.
That's how the system's
Um,
set up, which is crazy.
you know,
Yes. Yeah.
so I mean, it was amazing training for me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'll still say, like, my best training in terms of working with people did not come from any class. I have a master's in clinical psychology. I have a master's in divinity. My best training came from working with teenage dope fiends and their parents,
Mm.
and working with kids who are walking the street. Like that's how I learned how to be of use, actually, to people. Um, and yeah, I started in those jobs. I had an awesome, amazing mentor who passed, Dr. Ibrahim Faraj. Went from being a Russian Orthodox priest to a Sufi mystic,
Mm.
living in Turkey. took me in when I had nothing, gave me nothing but love and support and grace. And I always say he was so cool. I didn't realize he was my mentor until after he passed.
Mm.
You know, he was just there for me. Um, and he was the one who kind of tuned me in when he's like, "Hey, those massive weed smoking sessions that you have in your room with like five dudes who come out crying or who are like, transformed." He's like, "That's ministry." And I'm like, "Ah, sorry, we're just getting high. Just talking." I'm like, he's like, "Come on, my guy." He's like, "That's actually ministry." He's like, "You are ministering to the people that other folks are not ministering to." He's like, he's like, "You'll know it when they start coming around, not trying to get high." And bong, like as soon as it like folks just started coming through. So
Mm.
been in the sort of like, sort of casually sort of helping folks. But then 2003, I have a master's in divinity. I just got my master's in divinity. No, sorry. I just finished my master's in clinical psychology. One of my former clients from drug and alcohol rehab is this like maybe 20, 19-year-old guy. He had a 2-year-old daughter. His girlfriend had just died of an OD. And he was like, "I can't stop drinking." And I was like, "Is there any time when you don't want to drink?" And he's like, "When I do mushrooms." I was like, "Okay." So once a month, sat down, he did about 5 grams of mushrooms. And because I had had him in inpatient, because I'd had him in outpatient, because I'd been one of those people that had been consistent for him since he was, 16, 15, 16. And because of my training, my harm reduction training, it was meet people where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't like, because 12, inpatient and stuff was all harm reduction. I mean, it was all 12 step, 12 step, 12 step, which I totally appreciate. I have mad respect for 12 step. It
Me
saved a
too.
lot of lives. It's not a treatment model around that is free that anybody can access, right? Like there's lots of really good things about 12 step, right? And there is even a harm reduction element in 12 step,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't have to be sober in order to go to a 12 step meeting. You just have to have a desire to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's harm reduction. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, but because I had come from such a harm reduction standpoint at that point, I was like, if this is what it takes in order for you to stop drinking and you want to stop drinking, then let's go into this. So we did about 5 sessions and he's like, "Hey man, I don't think I need this anymore." And I was like, "You still drinking?" And he's like, "Eh." He's like, "I'll have half a beer," but like, he's like, "I don't really want it." He's like, he's like, he's a mechanic. He's like, gotta go out with the guys and this is what they do." And I'm like, "Okay, so what else is going on for you?" He's like, "Well, I joined a men's group. It's a bunch of dads. They're all older. They're like helping me like get into like school. They're like, he's like the drinking shit, man." He's like, "I think a lot of it was just really lonely." And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"I hear you." And I was like, "All right, well, the shit is here if you need it, He's like, "Whoa." He's like, "Because I told all these guys about what we're doing, and now they want to do it too." So that's how I started sitting with people with medicine. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
go to the Amazon and kick it with the Shipibo. I didn't like go to. I mean, I love Oaxaca, but like I didn't like. I wasn't kicking it with the Mazatec. Like none of all that shit is culturally isolated. To like the people that I was working with, they were in Oakland. So I worked with what was in Oakland. I worked with people that were in Oakland. I worked with like that Oakland culture. So yeah, off and on since around 2003, I've been like working with folks with a variety of different substances as a way of like just getting them in touch with their spirits, their minds, all of it. Been
Thanks,
pretty.
man. You said earlier that your parents, what bios, man, by the way, that's pretty incredible. You said it was an intense set. Would you go into
Yeah.
that a little bit?
I mean, let's see. Like I said, my dad did 37 years in prison for supposedly for an armored car heist that he was not at. No one says that he was there, but because someone died there and supposedly he planned it, he got 60 years, which obviously it's a political setup.
Mm.
Um, you know, but it's, when you're trying to help people that are in crisis, you can't stand above them. You have
Mm.
to step into crisis a little bit,
Mhm.
right? So it's not like my mom was sitting there trying to save Harlem from the Lower East Side. My mom was trying to save Harlem from Harlem. We
Mm.
didn't live in the projects. We lived down the block from the projects. That's the separation. It's not that large, you know. We weren't trying to save other communities. We were trying to save our community. So, we had crackheads banging on our doors, in the middle of the night. Um, I've seen people shot. Like, I mean, all the bullshit that like happens in inner cities, and it's happened a lot more in the 80s. That was just part of the regular. That was the daily, kids getting pushed into onto the train tracks and getting their gold chains snatched off them, their shoes. I mean, like, it was intense. And at the same time, when you're a kid, you don't know it's not normal until you
Mhm.
see something else, you know? Like, I remember going to boarding school, and there were so many kids who had never seen a black person before, except for on TV. And they assumed that that was my reality. I was like, dude, I grew up in Manhattan. The only surprise that I have is that you guys aren't all Jewish. I thought all white people were Jewish. Like, what is this? What kind of white is this? So like, it's very cosmopolitan, very, exciting, community to grow up around, but it was also like very intense. There was a lot of need all around us. And, one of my aunts is one of the first people to open a Montessori school in Harlem. Like, yeah, like I come from rock stars. Like, I
You
come from
sure
like,
do, man.
yeah, like they're amazing, amazing people. And, some of the, I was going to write a book or a chapter in a memoir called Children of the Revolution, because it's like the butcher's son is a vegetarian, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't always get the benefits of what your parents do, right? Because it's so externally focused that the internal sometimes is lacking.
Mhm.
So like, as me and my peers, turning 50, some of us are looking back and we're like, okay, so this is why, our relationships are the way they are. This is why our relationships to authority are the way that we are. This is why our childhoods were so truncated, right? For the benefit of the community, right? And so there's just something to contend with on that.
Mm. Yeah, and then and also to contextualize this, because growing up with rock stars, no doubt, Service is their middle names,
Yep.
and so then you get this experience in the, I mean, it is a joke. The White Mountains. I mean, that's a joke. So you're in
Was
you're
the
in
name of them? I did not make it up.
I do, yeah, yeah. I'll continue to laugh at the joke and the seriousness. So you go from Harlem to the White Mountains to Morocco, and there's one thing I want to bring up there, but like that juxtaposition, because it was like a private school experience around, like, you're the one black guy, one black person.
There's like seven, eight of us. Yeah, school 300, about
Yeah,
7 or 8 of us.
yeah.
But I was, even among them, I was the weirdo because I wasn't a
Mm,
sports guy. I wasn't like, again, I wasn't, I mean, said with all humility, I wasn't impressed by whiteness.
yeah.
Like, it didn't shock me. I didn't feel, I felt financially inferior because I was.
Hmm.
And there were some cultural assumptions that they had that were kind of hard to deal with. It's funny. I went in as a sophomore, and I was, as you can imagine, I was an loved English, loved reading, da da da, whatever. So I go in as a sophomore, second year, and they put me in first year English. And I was like, hmm. And I look at the syllabus, and it's all books that I've read. And so I go to my English teacher, and I was like, hey, I think I should be in the next grade up because I've read all these books. And he said this, and this is not a bad man, right? Like, oftentimes when people hear me talk, I talk about well-meaning white people. And I
Hmm.
say that because like, sometimes when I talk about white people, people assume that I'm talking about some like pitchfork wielding, like, ass, like, no, like, this is a very, very, very nice, well-meaning white man said to me, said, well, we read differently here. And I was like, I wasn't even offended. I was like, wow. I'm like, I thought there was only one way to read. Tell me, like, you're the teacher. Tell me some shit. Like, what?
Yeah.
How do you guys read? And he's like, well, we read for plot and we read for character and we read for description. And I was like, nah, that's how I read too. I read like that as well. And so like I had to prove myself. And so like there were a few ways in that private prep school sort of area that I had to prove myself that I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't deficient in some way. And I think I ended up having to do that for the 3 years that I was there,
Yeah.
consciously or unconsciously.
There's this thing comes. I'm teaching a class right now on suffering, and I did this a survey of about 12 different religious traditions, and then a dive into psychoanalysis, and I'm then looking at kind of Jungian and spiritual approaches. And what comes to mind is like well-meaning white people. It is this issue with ignorance. They're. I mean, so I want to dive in there a little bit from kind of cultural but also racial perspective, your experience of ignorance regarding the projections of others. Would you kind of open that up a little bit?
Yeah. I say it in the documentary, right? That at one point someone a white person asked me, have have I ever used psychedelics to transcend my race? And my response was, why would I want to transcend my race?
Yeah.
Like I come from rock stars. I come from amazing people. Like we were given shit food and we made culinary masterpieces. We were given broken military instruments and we made jazz. Like, why would I want to transcend my race? My people are awesome. My question to you, sir, is why do you want to transcend your race?
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Because your perspective and my perspective can be different and we can have a dialogue, right? If you understand that your perspective is not my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of white people, it's really hard for them to accept that their narrative is one, not the only one, and two, not the dominant one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That what they're
Yeah.
thinking, their ignorance is like, that's not my ignorance,
Right.
right? Like I've traveled so many places around this world. I've been so blessed to go to so many different spots. And I've had people say, well, careful, that's a dangerous neighborhood, or that's a dangerous area. Again, I grew up in New York in the 80s in Harlem. I'm like, I know how to navigate quote unquote dangerous neighborhoods. Like that's your ignorance. Like for me, I'm like, okay, I see that dude got a gun. These guys are just dealing. Let me just go parlay with the dealers to make sure that I can walk down this block and not get any drama. Like, we good? We good? Cool. Oh, they appreciate the dot. Let's move forward.
Mm.
That's ignorant in that area. But these white people, these other folks, right? Like they may not have that same knowledge. And rather than being like, oh, Ayize knows how to do this, that's so awesome, that's so great. It's like, no, 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 keep Ayize away because he has the same ignorances that we do. And I'm like, no, my friends. So we grow as humans when we accept what we don't know and find other humans who know what we don't know and learn from them. But I think part of like white exceptionalism in the US is this idea that like if I don't know it, nobody else knows it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be really dangerous.
Well, then I want to workshop something with you. I'm speaking this Sunday at a kind of multicultural Unitarian church about, and
Love you.
one of my roles is to address the issue that essentially the thesis of my part of the lecture is that, well, there's this whiteness is essentially this the signifier for a people that is disconnected from their indigenous or medicine traditions. So the dominant dynamic is that there's an attempt to take it from others or to deny other people on this exceptionalism. And I'm very excited to begin to explore this more and more because I always thought I'd find medicine traditions by doing that, by going to the Shipibo or going to the Mazatec or going, to the Pueblo, and to then say, well, wait a second, I can mine this tradition and find the ways in which kind of my people had their medicine traditions squashed. and then are doing what one of my mentors, James Hollis, says: in the absence of a real conscious existence, we seek out secular surrogates. And so there's
Hmm.
this productionism and consumerism and dominion and ignorance that I
Hmm.
mean, look, I have a real open experience of whiteness, and I see value in there as well. But certainly when it comes to these dynamics, there's a real tragedy in whiteness that's a little disconnected from its root. What would you say to that? What comes up?
You know what really comes up for me is sexism.
I'm so excited to talk to you. Okay, go. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you look at the history of European plant medicine, it was primarily held
Yeah.
by women
Yeah.
over the age of 50 connected to the land,
Yeah.
right? Who held oral traditions. Now, first and foremost, to this day, you go to Europe, and who is some of the most disrespected people? Spinsters, they call them.
Mm-hmm.
When over the age of 50, not married, no man telling them what to do, usually living at a subsistence or close to subsistence level, so living off of the land, right? Who have a lot of oral tradition.
Mm.
Those are the people historically who held the plant medicine tradition.
Yeah.
But because of the church, right? Because of the Western Catholic Church,
Yeah.
right? And this primacy on literature, right? And this primacy on academia, right? Whether it be through the church or through colleges, right? That folk knowledge is almost is literally demonized,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is literally seen as this like otherworldly, superstitious, evil, or at the very least backwards and twisted knowledge. But if you take that same woman and you put her in a serape and you put her in the middle of Mexico, you're going to have a bunch of white people going down to Oaxaca being like, oh, she's a medicine woman. She's a medicine woman. Yo, you got medicine women in Scandinavia,
Yeah.
in Switzerland, and Ireland's got tons, right?
Yeah.
All of these women. So the sexism that is inherent
Mm.
in current European notions of what it means to be enlightened. I mean, you can get into enlightenment if you want. To be enlightened, to be intelligent, um, to be forward thinking, right? All of that, it skirts around. It I'll say like at its core, it has to be predicated on the certain level of sexism that says that older women aren't important to listen to.
Mm. I am so relieved and glad you went there, man. That's a great thing to open up. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that very, very recently in the psychedelic literature and spaces that are looking at these matrilineal medicine traditions and the destabilization of the communal culture. And I loved reading it at some point, I think, in the Immortality Key, and um, it was written about the medicine tradition being deeply close to birthing and the process of birthing and herbalism and like it's just like it makes total sense that like women that congregate around these radical cycles, these blood rites, and creating plant relationships that kind of infuse a religious cultural dynamic that is passed along and passed along. And the because then we've of course got this patriarchal dynamic that is hurting every single person. And I need to, like, my wife and I are constantly in conversation about this, and she's so often needing to remind me, thankfully, because of the culture I grew up in and the ways that I'll be blinded to, as a fish in water, and needing to open myself up and be and get feedback, have a sparring partner that's like, no, 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 not that. And I'm blessed with a really powerful partner who has continued to dig in where I need digging in.
Yeah, you're definitely blessed. I mean, I was lamenting on this a couple of weeks ago that like I don't have elders. I don't have elder
Mm,
male approaching 50 and I say this with like as much humility as possible, like I don't know what the proper stance is in terms of like being a partner to someone going through menopause.
Mm-hmm.
I have no fucking idea. There has been no conversation with
Mm.
me at any point in my life about like, hey, sometimes someone that you love is going to go through something that's like really intense and it's a hormonal shift on the same level as puberty.
Yeah.
And right, and it's not like, oh, like anyone who says that like menopause is not a big deal is a liar and an asshole. It's something that we ignore in this community, in this culture,
Yeah.
like entirely, right? And it is entire 1,000 times more than I will ever have to deal with it. The women who are approaching that age in my life have to deal with it more. I'm not trying to take over that space, right? But just like as someone who taught sex ed for like a decade, right, to high schoolers, right? I was fortunate enough to be like, okay, listen, this is what's going to be happening, guys. This is what's happening in your body, but hey, this is what's happening to the women in your life, whether it be a partner, whether it be your sister, your mother has gone through this, right? Like, and like this is just knowledge to have, right? And I've had reports back from boys being like, that was really useful because I didn't know what the hell was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that. I don't have someone who's been through this being like, hey man, it's okay. This is what it looks like. This is what's going on. It's okay. It's fine. I can figure it out on my own. But I'm fortunate that I have a lot of resources. I have a
Yeah.
lot of,
Yeah.
like, but I think about all those folks that don't.
And you're open and willing, which sets you up in different ways than anybody else.
Mhm.
So it gets into something that we have on our list here to talk about around community.
Yeah.
And so interesting. It also sets us up when you go to Morocco. And when
Mhm.
you said it earlier, I was thinking about a woman I interviewed on the podcast for, her name is Dr. Tanya Lerman, and she's at Stanford. She wrote a book called When God Talks Back. I stumbled
Hmm.
into her because she wrote an NPR article on what we call schizophrenia or a thought disorder. And she
Hmm.
said her research suggests that people um, in individualistic cultures, the voice of the uh, hallucination tends to be menacing and shaming and violent
That's
and
for
aggressive.
real.
Did
Yeah.
you read the article? And then in a collectivist culture, the voice is a benevolent ancestor coming to visit and guide. And if that doesn't like send off alarm bells around the culture that we're in here in the West and certainly in the United States, I don't know any more research that is necessary. So yeah, riff on that for a bit.
One of the benefits of psychedelics, and it can happen in lots of different places, lots of different ways, is a freedom from a rationalistic world,
Yeah.
right? We forget that like reason and rationality is a construction, right? That it is not the inherent place of the universe, right?
Yeah.
Like the universe is chaotic, right? And it does not always make sense. And there are ways of dealing with that, which can be
Mhm.
quite useful, right? To be like, okay, this is just, working with clients, as a therapist, some people are like, I don't know why today is fucked up and I don't know why things are going so bad. And I'm like, yeah, you don't have to know, but you know that it's real. Like this is where you're feeling right now. And there's not always an answer for it, but you get
Mhm.
to feel it, right? You don't have to, sorry, hope you didn't hear that.
All
Um, Truck going by. We don't have to know why we feel something in order for it to be valid,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're in this like hyper rationalistic society and you hear a voice, it's like I have to attach this to a place. What is going on, right? Like there's
Mhm.
this like cold fusion with that. There has to,
Mm.
right? Like
Mhm. Mhm.
as opposed to, and I will say like, no system of domination is ever complete. And so you see it in I see it in Black community. Like sometimes people just, what are you doing? I'm listening for the Lord, and people waking up, you know, the Lord told me, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to ask how the Lord specifically told you. I'm just going to accept this as a reality. right? Because sometimes they'll be like, the Lord told me to play this number, or the Lord told me that you need to go and see this, that. I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna let it in, right? And know that like the world is a chaotic place that doesn't always play by the rules that humans set
Mhm.
up, and that's okay, you know? And I think in places like Morocco and other spots, it's like it's not even okay. It's like it's joyous when you get a touch of the non-ordinary world, right? Like when you have a dream and the dream is expressive and tells you to do something or lets you know something, that people are like, I have this dream, and the dreams, and I mean, look at the Bible. Like, what? How many people are motivated by dreams? By like random voices, and they're not like, oh my God, they're like, yes, right? So have this culture that is like, I dreamed about you last night.
Mm.
Yes, I was told I have a message for you. I was told this, but right, and it's like cool. So then, if you're like, I'm hearing voices, the tension of like, oh God, I must be crazy, isn't there.
Wow. Yeah.
It's like, oh wait, what's going on? I can be curious about this. I can be open to this. This is not to say that there aren't
Yeah.
severe cases of mental
Totally.
illness throughout the world,
All the yeah.
but we do see the more a culture is colonized, the harder it is for indigenous mechanisms of dealing with that psychosis, for lack of a better term, like the harder it is for those mechanisms to come into play. Have you ever read oh, what's his name? Uh The Noonday Demon.
Mm-mm.
Oh, I wish I gotta look him up.
The
It's
noon.
this
Yeah.
The Noonday Demon. It's this absolutely beautiful book. Um Andrew Solomon.
Yeah. I got. Okay. Yeah. Atlas of Depression. Interesting.
Depression all around the world.
Interesting. Uh huh.
What it looks like. This is someone who suffers from depression himself, right? And just looks at what are the how do people treat depression all around the
Mm.
world?
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly fascinating. He tells
I'm
this
ordering
awesome
that
story.
one.
Yeah, man, he's great. He's great. And a lot of folks, you know, the Western notion of sitting down and telling everybody all the things that are wrong with you in a small room where nobody else can see and there's no light and no exercise and no music, doesn't really benefit everyone all the time. It's
Yeah.
weird,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It doesn't make much sense.
I mean, I think like I love Freud. Okay. I love
Yeah.
Freud. I love Jung.
Yeah.
I love those guys. And I think in a Western context, in a Western secular context, similar to what your mentor said,
Mm-hmm.
there are ways in which these practices make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that with my work, the more distance someone has from those Western secular rational concepts, the more I'm able to bring a lot more of my spirituality,
Mm.
right? A lot of like the physical stuff, a lot of the like joy, right? A lot of the relational bonding. That work tends to go a little faster
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Well, and that
And I
brings
think,
up. Go on.
no, 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 go
It
on.
brings up the community piece. And so, but before we get there, let me plant that seed about community. You mentioned something about enlightenment earlier, and you said we could get into that, but I really wanted to turn over that stone with you.
I mean, the Enlightenment, you know, it's this intellectual predication like that. There was an endarkenment at some point, and it's
Yeah.
like, no, this is just Europeans realizing that the rest of the world is progressing while they were in the Dark Ages. Like
Hmm.
that's really all the Enlightenment is. Added with it some individualism that the US then takes and
Hmm.
like does much with, you know, but like this idea that culture starts, you know, with the Enlightenment, you know, or like modern culture. If the Industrial Revolution is based off of many of the concepts of the Enlightenment, right, or you know, a renaissance of the Enlightenment, we know that industrialization is leading to the death of the planet.
Yeah.
So at some point, we have to question the intellectual foundations of our advancement,
Mm-hmm.
right? Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man a fish, he'll eat forever. Eh, how about populating that pond?
Mm-hmm.
How about
Mm-hmm.
being a steward for those fish?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that idea? Well, we see that in China. We see that in India. We see that in Africa. We just don't see it in Europe. Why? Well, because Western European natural resources were pretty much depleted. And so a lot of this outward expansion of European ideals comes from a deficit model,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas in Africa and India and Asia, you don't really have to struggle that hard to get fed.
Mm-hmm.
And that develops a different type of psychology, right?
Well, and you another thing you said earlier was a culture. The more a culture is colonized, and I think that just the way you phrase that, I really like that. And so, what does that mean to you? A culture being colonized?
Oh, you don't colonize people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's Frantz Fanon talking about Algeria, right? Algerians outnumbering French 13 to 1. So how does the French stay in Algeria for as long as they did? We have to colonize the mentality of the people. You have to get them to believe that 13 Algerians are worth less than one French person, right? And that's not an individual project. You don't go to each individual Algerian. There's a cultural element to that says that Algerians are less than, Algerians are weaker than, Algerians are not as smart as, Algerians can't coordinate. Then the French are able to come in and just by appearance alone, okay, right? And so, Frantz Fanon's, I'm sure you know, his remedy for that is violence,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just the only way that we can, throw off that colonial mentality is through violence. You cannot give somebody their freedom. They have to take their freedom, right? I'm 75% of the way there with that. But I think in general, we need to think about what are the decolonial practices that people can engage in that liberate not just the individual, but the entire community. I'm not free if the person that looks like me, sounds like me, talks like me, that lives right next to me is not free. Like that's not freedom. Because I'm one step away from that individual.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So when I think about liberation, when I think about freedom, it's not an individual process. It's always a communal process because oppression is not an individual process. It's a collective process.
Okay, so I may be jumping, but now it seems to be a good setup for you to talk about community and a table of our own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so like I said before, I've been in the psychedelic space since like 2003 in one form or another. Took a break, had some stuff go on. A good friend of mine committed suicide. I was like, I'm not doing any work. Came back up, had a partner that wasn't all that into the psychedelic stuff. I was like, okay, cool. Took a break from the Bay Area, and that was when Oakland decriminalized
Mm-hmm.
psychedelics, right? Second city in the US, right? After Denver. So I'm coming back to the Bay and I'm like, I'm gonna get in this. Yes. Like I've been doing this shit underground, had my own kind of shame about it, had my own like undercover. I was working in private prep high schools, back to high schools. I was a school therapist
Mm-hmm.
in high school for like a decade. I was a dean. And then I would do the psychedelic work on the weekends, right? So just trying to like, how do I figure this out? But I was like, okay, I'm coming back. I'm gonna come above ground. I'm gonna come above ground on this. And yeah, I'd been working in Oakland. I worked with Black, White, Latino, Hmong, Venezuelan, Thai, Nigerian, Sudanese, like worked with everybody. Going to this one meeting, all white, nothing but white people in the psychedelic space. I'm like Oakland isn't that white.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what the like, what is this? Right? Again, I don't have anything inherently against the white people, right? I have something against like white dominance,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was just like, this is weird, right? And I wasn't like, fuck you, I'm out of here. I was just like, this is just weird, right? And then somebody was like, hey, there are these people that are like doing this training and like given your background and whatever. I think you'd be great at it. And it was Francois and Aharon. I don't know if you've heard of them, I'm sure. No.
No.
So there was a big story about them. This is the French woman and the Israeli guy who um, spent a few decades abusing people.
Oh man.
Uh, yeah, like in some really foul ways. And I was, starting a training with them. And from the beginning, I was like, nope, like I don't trust this. Like this isn't, you know, there were a few things. They were like sitting at the front of the circle. I was like, how do you sit at the front of a circle? What is that? Doesn't make any sense. They were like, you know, what was it? Oh, they were like acknowledging the seven directions. I was like, there's seven directions? Like, what are you talking about? Where? Right. And then they were like, and I was like, okay, would you do this like all the time? You only do it in medicine ceremony. Whoa. To me, ritual is routine. It's every time. So like, why are you bringing in turkey feathers and all this shit when you don't do this in your regular life? I'm so confused right now. Um, didn't know their medicines, like really what they were working with. And so I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna know. And I was like, right before the final training, I was like, you know what? I can't hold on to your tradition. It's not where I come from. It's not, I don't think it's gonna serve me or my people. So I'm out. Right. So that was my first above ground attempt. Then I went over one of my a friend from there was like, hey, you should check out this thing that I'm at Sacred Garden. That was this guy, Bob Otis. So I go over there and I work with them for a little bit, but then I'm like, Bob's racial trauma shit is like just spilling all over on people, like does not know how to work with powerful black people, doesn't know how to work with like true people of faith. Like it's just it's awkward, it's weird. Start hearing stories about him. I'm like, no. Right. So I'm like, okay, I tried the above ground. I'm not doing the above ground. I'm going back underground. Right. And whenever I have a big, decision to make, I'll do a little journey for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like this journey, and it's like what I get, right? It's voice coming through. And to me, I feel like voice is not appropriate because it's like sense, like just like
Mm-hmm.
if a body could talk, like if the whole body could talk, if the cells in the body could talk, it'd be my body talking. And it was like, you've got to do a documentary about Black people and psychedelics. And I was like, nope, you have got me confused with someone else because I know people who have done documentaries, and I am not one of them. I do not have a shitload of money to burn. I have not done that before. This is, yes, it needs to happen. I will, if I see somebody trying to do it, I will help them do it. But I am not gonna start a shit. I can't do this shit on my own. And it was like, you've got to make a documentary about Black people and psychedelics. And I was like, you are confused, great spirit. you have you have chosen the wrong one. You have chosen poorly. I am a writer. I am a therapist. I am a teacher. I am many things. I am not a filmmaker. Please pick somebody else. And it was like, you have to make a documentary about Black people and psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I have been trained is that if you are called 3 times and you say no, then you are cursing yourself. And I was like, frack. Right. And so I was like, okay. And, started on this path. And what I did was I hit up all the Black people that I knew in the psychedelic space. And then my co producer hit up all the Black people that he knew in the psychedelic space. And we set a date. And unfortunately, it wasn't intentional, but it was the same date as Burning Man. And we're like, we're doing this thing, come. And we call it a conference, but I'm realizing as I'm talking about this more, I need to be clear. There were no panels,
Mm-hmm.
there were no keynotes. There was no, you didn't have to pay to come. In fact, if you couldn't afford to come, we would fly you out. Um, all the food was provided. Um, what it really was a chance for Black people in the psychedelic space, Black people who were typically the only one at the conference or the only one, on the panel, right? Instead of that being that, it's like it's just all of us,
Mm.
right? I remember one person was like, "Who's going to be there?" This is a question you'll hear from every Black person whenever you invite them to anything. Who going to be there? And I'm like, dude, just come. I don't know. And I'm like, I know, just come. And he came and he was like, "Oh, he's here. Oh, she's here. Oh, okay, okay, okay." Right. And what you saw is that people got to let their guard down
Mm.
and they got to chill and they got to actually talk about what it feels like to hold Blackness in this psychedelic community that is predicated on whiteness. Like the psychedelic community, like not the plant medicine community, right? Not the healing community, but the psychedelic community maps on down is predicated on exactly what you were talking about earlier. This notion that we don't have a culture of our own, that there are these indigenous traditions that we need to tap into in order to regain a sense of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a conversation that Black people have. We have a very different relationship to that. Even we're talking about like I was talking the other day about like land acknowledgements and like indigenous communities and native communities. I'm like I don't do the land acknowledgements. I'm like Black people have a very different relationship with native communities than white people,
Go into
and we
that.
actually,
What is it?
but we have to be specific about what native communities we're talking about because there's some native communities that own slaves.
Mm-hmm.
There's some native communities that kicked out all of their dark skinned native brothers and sisters. Wilma Mankiller still says like the biggest sin of her nation was that they owned slaves. And there are some native communities that took slaves in. There's some native communities that got lopped off of the official Native American rolls because they had Black community, right? There's like all these different relationships. So we need to have, I'm willing to have that conversation. And also native communities need to talk about their own internalized anti-Blackness,
Mm-hmm.
where there are native communities that are like, don't stay out in the sun too long or you'll get too dark. What the fuck does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're native, there's native um like Miss Cherokee or Miss whatever, right? Like those like Miss Native pageants
Pageant, yeah.
where they yeah, where they've kicked women out because they were too dark or because they had Black heritage. Right. So that's a conversation that I'm willing to have. But what I'm not willing to do is just like sort of capitulate to the sort of white guilt around acknowledging the crimes that we did. And no, 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 no. Right. So that's just one example
Mm-hmm.
of how being in an all Black experience is different than being in the psychedelic experience of the stuff because all of the psychedelics community is rooted in whiteness. So yeah, so we had this awesome gathering, had some cameras there, got to interview everybody. And then, we did some smaller ones, got to interview Dr. Carl Hart, who is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
freaking amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and just got to really, I see it as a snapshot of where people are at around 2022. 20, yeah, 20, can't remember when we did it. Yeah, 2021, 2022. Um, like to where Black people in the movement were and are. The benefit for me is that like I was about to be done with the above ground, and now I have this community of Black people, therapists, educators, lawyers, doctors, growers, artists, spiritual folks who we network now, and it's
Mm.
so organic. You know, like it's not like we're gonna meet every second Thursday. Da, 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 da. No, it's like, oh, you're in town. Yo, this one's in town, and everybody gets together. Oh, this one just had surgery and needs some help. Hey, folks are throwing money there. Hey, I'm trying to put this conference together. If you guys can come, you can get 70% off. That boom, folks are going. I did not have that at 2003. I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
that. I didn't have that before this doc, and it's been absolutely gorgeous. And now we're doing a qualitative assessment of uh, people who've gone through psychedelic assisted therapy training programs, Black people who've gone through psychedelic assisted therapy training programs. We're doing research. What's that like? How does that feel? What have they gotten out of it? What do they still need? Um, yeah, we're doing lots of cool work, and I just like seeing it grow.
And what are you finding?
Oh, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
can I can immediately project onto that and imagine a
I can too, and that's the easy thing. I think
right.
the hard thing for me is to like
Yeah.
just because having and I've worked with psychedelics today. I've worked with Berkeley Center for Psychedelic Science. I've worked with um, CIIS's program, and like everything, right? This is a great thing about the doc, right? We're not a monolith. Black people are not a
Mm-hmm.
monolith,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's some Black people that are like, this is great. This is everything I wanted. Da, 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 da. And there's some black people that are like, I can't do this. This is right. There's a range, right? And so I'm a certain type of Blackness, but I don't want to speak for everybody.
Mm.
That's not useful. I do want to give everybody a chance to speak.
When you were talking about land earlier and land
Mhm.
acknowledgments, what did you mean?
Like when people are like, I want to acknowledge that we're on, like Pomo land, da 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 da. And I'm like, so? Like, do you know any Pomo people? Like, do you know, like, have you built those relationships? And I've been to places where people have, right? Where
Yeah.
like, because we want to talk about land, then you got to be like, okay, the tribes that were here 500 years ago now live in Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
but we are still in conversation with them, and we are holding a seed bank for them. I was at the Soul Fire Farm um, in upstate New York
Mm.
last, and they're like, no, we still have a relationship with these people. I'm into that 110%. Real and honest relationship and real and honest conversation. I've had a lot of good conversations with this woman named Marlena Robbins, native DNA woman from who's at UC Berkeley. If you ever get a chance to interview her, you should. Absolutely amazing, talking about um, all a lot of different aspects about plant medicine and the community. Some people in her community are like, "Don't do that psychedelic shit. What are you talking about?" Right? But there's this fetishization in the psychedelic community. It's almost like like the Indian crying. You know what I mean? Like in the old trash commercials in the
Yes. Oh yeah.
70s.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, can you actually have some conversations with some actual native people? Like, can you actually like conversate? And I feel like the psychedelic community has been reticent to do that, and instead it's sort of fetishized. Not interested in that. As another community that could be fetishized, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in having real and honest communication with folks.
Well, because is it that it feels too performative?
It is performative. Like, like seriously, like what? Like, imagine someone being like, I want to acknowledge that the black people were enslaved and brought here, and this is,
Yeah.
all of our. It's like, you mean the black people that are serving food here at this thing right now? Did you go talk to them?
Yeah.
Did you go to that community? Did you bring someone in here? Like, what is the purpose of this?
Mm.
Right? And I think there is a purpose in all white
Mm.
spaces. But when you have people of color there, when you have black people there, well, you have to have a different conversation. And I think one of the things that happens in white spaces is that it assumes whiteness for everyone. When I went to boarding school, my uncle, absolutely amazing, brilliant man, said a lot of things to me. But one of the things he said that always sticks, he's like, remember, when they say we, they're not talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I was young. I was like, oh my God, that's so racist. I can't believe he said that. And then I go to school and I'm like, oh, they're like, yeah, when we enslaved the Africans, I was like, who are you talking about?
Mm.
Like, well, our notion of manifest destiny, like, who are you referring to? Right? But they didn't have to talk to me because I was the only one in the room. Okay, fine. But then when you come to psychedelics, predicated on the work of people of color, you gotta talk to the people of color in the room.
Mhm.
And it can't just be performative.
Yeah, that comes down to this massive movement that you've got on community. I mean, so you're doing that in Oakland, right? Like Jimmy and I've been
We're doing
talking. Yeah, we talked a little bit about what you're up to, and you're doing some incredible stuff, man.
Yeah, but our network is wide, man.
Yeah.
We got people in Maryland, we got people in Texas, we got people in Portland, we got people in LA, we got people, like it's not, yes, Oakland, yes. I love Oakland, been here a majority of my life. We got like strong community here, but like every place where we showed this documentary, there were people who were like, how can I tap in?
Wow. Yeah.
I want to be part of this. This ain't a local thing.
It keeps reminding me of what even I like Richard Rohr's community. It's action and contemplation.
Yep.
It's Thich Nhat Hanh's work of socially engaged Buddhism.
Hmm.
It's this, and so I guess one of my associations with what you're describing in whiteness and psychedelic space, it's rather masturbatory, and that it's like, okay, I'm having an experience, but it stops there, as opposed to now changing your life, now changing your relationships, now changing the way you engage. And that is not emphasized. I mean, certainly those of us that do integration work, that's hopefully our, massive charge, but it's empty when you're like, okay, you went and masturbated in a Shipibo, basically, and had a great pleasure-filled experience. Sorry, but um,
Yeah.
how does that change? How does it change you? How does it change how you show up? How does it change your people?
And here's another way, right? That's important. Speaking of Richard Rohr, who I love, I think is great,
And
right? And and I said it to him, so I can say it to
yeah,
everybody.
no, yeah,
We were at the Council of World Religions, and he said, if
yeah.
not just being used for recreation, psychedelics can be this great way of
I
changing
remember
people's
this
lives.
conversation. Yes.
And I went to him with nothing but love and respect in my heart. And I was like, but Richard, what you have to understand is that recreation for Black people in this country
Yeah.
is sacred.
Amen.
We were not brought here to retire,
Yeah.
to recreate, right? To recreate, right? We were brought here for service. And God bless Richard. He's like, even today, and I was like, Richard, if you have more than five Black men, big Black men, laughing on any corner in the US for over half an hour, I guarantee you the police will be called.
Mm, mm,
Just Black joy is threatening
mm,
to so many people. And he's like, and then and to Richard's credit, he's like, and so there's no need to demonize recreation. I'm like, I'm just
mm.
trying to. He's like, yeah, I get it. I was like, see, this is why I fuck with you.
Yeah,
You
he'd
know,
get that. He gets that. Yeah.
yeah, you totally
It's a
got
good,
it.
and I carried that with me too, because there is this like austerity and like, so I was at a funeral very recently and it was extremely white and I say that not just this one, but the way in which this culture and community, and I mean in whiteness, tends to grieve is oftentimes a social box to check, where, and I'm being cynical, I'm being careful, but it's also true in that there's a kind of, okay, we did that thing, we came together. And so I was out at another wedding this past weekend, and there was a large Black community that was there. Huh? And
Funeral or wedding?
there was a wedding. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Funeral and wedding. And essentially I'm
Okay.
talking about the ways that we celebrate. And
Right.
and the community that where the wedding was happening, there was a large blackness was really represented in the kind of religious and spiritual dimensions of the ceremony. And I was talking to this one minister, and she was saying, I said, this is real ceremony. She said, you should see a black funeral.
Yep.
And I what so to say this, like
Oh,
she said, oh, number one, it's not over until it's done. And there is room for ecstasy, pain, grief, trauma, fear, overwhelmment, joy, celebration, what you purge. And I thought, oh my God, like that's so much more in line with how we are. I mean, as a psychotherapist, I'm like, can we just shake shit up and actually get you into your feelings and expressing your body's desires? And so I'm just inspired as you're talking about this and kind of seeing how whiteness, in so many ways, is disconnected in a very general way, because I know I'm using generalities, but very disconnected from the currents and flows of our natural bodies. And it's sad. It's sad in a lot of ways. I see it in psychotherapy. I see it in holy spaces. Any thoughts?
yep. Yeah, I mean, I think this is why for me, the next project that I'm really working on is trying to get land in Northern California to be able to have space for people to do, for Black people to do ceremony
Yeah.
in a culturally responsive way, not just for Black people,
Hmm.
right? But just so that we can set the norm.
Hmm.
Because, one of the people in the documentary said it, it's our unofficial tagline: when Black people win, we all fucking win.
Yeah.
Like, you go to like, the example I use is like, if there's a cookout, there's a Black cookout. Black people are not going to see a Mongolian family on the other side of the park and be like, oh, well, we're going to be like, yo, Mongolians, y'all want some of this? Because our joy is collective, because we don't
Uh,
get through by ourselves, right? And there's this way not to serve white people because that has its own shit, but like similar to if the Blackness can be respected, the way the Mazatec can be respected,
yeah.
right? The way the Pomo can be respected, the way those that like this is a separate culture, and we do things in a different way. And there's there's cool ass white people, right, that can come in and be like, oh, okay, this serves more of what I need.
Hmm.
Then we're not just impacting Black people, we're impacting everyone.
Hmm.
And again, like when we're thriving, like when we're actually thriving, this is the thing that doesn't come up often in this erase, this sort of like black white dyad that happens in the
Mm.
US, right? What we forget that there is a white woman that was put on death row as part of for being one of the freedom riders.
Hmm.
We forget that in thriving Midwest Black communities, white people were equally thriving. What we forget is that, like, there is a history of Black people and white people working together and doing well. What it's predicated on, like I said at the beginning, is that whiteness is not the dominant culture. Because once you have that, then you can be like, oh, here's a different way of doing things. If I want a white dominant culture, I've got the rest of the US. But if I want to see what happens when Black people are in charge, holy fucking shit, look at this.
Mm.
Ah, right? So I'm working on trying to get some land, not to, like just like acres to have like a space where folks can do that. And kind of like what you were saying earlier too, like not just for medicine work,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
grow food.
Yeah. It
You know
can't
what I
be just
mean?
for the experience. It has action. Yeah. Right on.
That that's some white shit right there. Sorry,
Yeah.
no offense, but
None
like I'm gonna
taken.
come my medicine journey, and there we go, and then I'll see you later. And I'm like, where are you fed?
Oh,
And
a great question. Yes. Yeah.
and for me, like if this
Yeah.
is about health, well, Black communities, we don't just focus on mental health. It's mental, physical, spiritual. It's all
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
right? So
Where are
like,
you fed?
yeah, what are the herbs that we're growing to like
Mm.
help with folks? That's why these women over the age of 50 connected to the land, generally midwives, had not just the psychedelic stuff, but how do you stop bleeding?
All of it. Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you deal with pain? right? How do you reduce a fever? What do you do with a toothache? What do you do if somebody has cancer? Right? Like all these different herbs and like this relationship with the
Mm.
planet and with the plants that we're just beginning to be like, okay, maybe that is important. Maybe going to the doctor and getting a pharmaceutical every time isn't the way to go. Maybe, you
Every
know?
time. Yeah. Isaac, I'm pretty certain you and I could spend hours
Easily.
talking, and I hope I can't wait for the day when we can. Frankly, you are being in conversation with you is a real joy. I think I really appreciate this. We've got to start closing it out, so I want to be sure that we circle up on any little threads that are hanging out. I certainly so you can say your website here. I'll have it in the liner notes. But just let's close out. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Any big donors out there that really want to see what happens when a bunch of smart, coordinated, organized Black people have 10 acres in Northern California, let me know. You can reach out at
Good.
tableofourown.org, at
Yes.
tableofourown.org. There you can find the documentary. It's available there and on Vimeo, $20. If you're a person, this is another Black thing. If you're a person who cannot afford $20, shoot me an email. We can work something out. My email is on tableofourown.org. Um, yeah, just excited to be in conversation with you, man. I know you're doing.
Yeah.
I actually want to come down to Texas.
Come, man,
Um,
come,
2025. I got a few people down there that I'm like, I should just
come down. You
come
know
and check.
the Young Center would be our center, the Young Center. We could put some stuff together, man, and I would love to spend time with you in any way. So I'm yeah, come down, come down.
Let's make it happen.
Good. Hey, man, thank you. Like this is it's good being with you and I look forward to more time.
Yeah, same here. I'm glad we got this done.
Amen, man.